Today is April the 1st, 2025, and this is an oral history for the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. I'm Paul Yeager, joined by producer Cliff Brockman. Our guest today is David McCartney, retired archivist from the University of Iowa and former chair of the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting Board, and also a friend of the board in another way. We'll discuss that here in a moment. David, it is so good to have you here, and as I have said to you both at meetings and on this, it took two of us to do one of your job as chair of the Archives Board.
You're very kind to say that, Paul, but really it's such a wonderful group to work with. Running those meetings has been very much a joy, and I'm just delighted that you and Cliff are leading the pack now.
We'll talk about your archives in a minute, but I like to start at the beginning. You're a Charles City guy, and I think maybe even my very first board meeting, we talked about the Charles City tornado. Is that where your broadcasting story starts, David?
Well, not quite. I guess you could say it started as a serious listener of radio journalism. I was 12 years old at the time. This was the 1968 F5 tornado, which in that same system, also Oldline and several other Northeast Iowa communities were hit. But Charles City was hit very badly. And that evening, KCHA, the local radio station, signed back on the air using emergency power. And we had no electricity in our house. Our house was still standing. And in fact, we had newly homeless friends staying with us that evening. We had a full house. And I brought my big Pencrest brand multi-band shortwave AM FM radio downstairs to the living room and set it up for everyone to listen to KCHA. They were 24/7 for several days after the tornado. And up to that point, radio intrigued me a lot, but it was that tornado event and the coverage that KCHA provided, which later warranted a letter of merit from what was then the Weather Bureau, now the National Weather Service, commending the station staff for their heroic coverage. It was really, it was just an unbelievable time. And as a 12-year-old, I wasn't really quite old enough yet to get my hands dirty in the broadcasting business, but it really intrigued me. And about 4 years later, while I was in high school, I did write a letter of application to the station owner, Vern Bromberg, my first boss. Very friendly, very avuncular man. It was a locally owned radio station. Pretty much still is today, although in between 1972 and today, it went through a number of ownership changes. But at that time, it was like a mom and pop local radio station that had a very strong interest in community involvement. And so that's how I became interested in radio. It was even before the tornado, because you hear those stories of kids with their pocket transistor radios listening under the covers at night to a distant station. And I was one of those nerdy kids, I guess. But radio, for whatever reason, very strongly interested me. It's a bit paradoxical because I consider myself an introvert. I'm not really comfortable sometimes in crowds, but when you place a microphone in front of a person, maybe something happens to that person. I don't know. But yes, started in Charles City. I grew up there. And that was the station that we all listened to in the kitchen. And I was very honored and really excited when Mr. Bromberg wrote back and said, well, as a matter of fact, we are looking for backup help nights and weekends. And so I started in August of 1972. It was before the summer before my junior year in high school.
Summer year before your junior year of high school. Okay, so yeah, you're in that 16, barely able to drive. And here you might be, when you take the job, be the guy that hits the on-air button and your voice is heard. What was that first time like, David, when you did get to finally hit the on-air button?
Well, it was, I laugh now, but at the time I was absolutely mortified. Um, it was a very hot Saturday afternoon in August of 1972, and a lot of air conditioners were running in the area. And there were so many air conditioners running that our station went off the air about 10 minutes into my shift. Now, Saturday afternoons at that time, and KCHA, a kind of, I guess maybe a typical variety format. The program directors back in the, I'd say 1950s through the 70s, approached it with block programming. So you would have maybe 2 hours of country western early in the morning, polkas and so forth. My shtick was Saturday afternoons when we had Top 40. It was a rock and roll show, and the station owner uh, turned that time over to barely eligible high school students to run the station. So from 2 to 6 every other Saturday, I had this shit, and it gave the full-time announcers a break. They otherwise had a really grueling schedule. So I'm in the control room, and I cannot tell you what the first song was I played coming out of the 2 o'clock news, but I can tell you the second one because Joan Baez got her first line out in the quiet morning, and everything went black, everything went dark, and it was a brownout. There was a rolling brownout. We contacted Iowa Public Service Utility, which I think today is Alliant Energy. I'm not sure, and we got power back up maybe a half hour or 45 minutes later, but I could not get the transmitter filaments reactivated. So I called the chief engineer at his home, and Nick Tector, wonderful, wonderful guy, very resourceful. He could put things together with duct tape and paper clips, which you often had to do at a small market station. So I called Dick at his home, and his wife Joan answered, and she said, "Well, I'm sorry, Dick's out of town at a Jehovah Witness conference or a gathering, but you'll have to call Vern, the station owner, the only other person at the station who had a first-class FCC license." And so, okay, thank you, Joan. I call Vern at his home, and his wife Norma answers, and she said, "Well, he's out golfing right now. If you call the barkeep at the country club, you can reach him there." And I said, "Thank you, Norma." So I hung up and I called the Charles City Country Club. The barkeep who answered said, "Well, I think he's out on the eighth green, but I'm not sure. I'll send somebody out to get him." Of course, this was decades before cell phones. So they ran, whoever it was, ran out to get him, brought him back into the clubhouse. Here I am on my first shift calling the owner of the station with an issue. But, dead air means lost revenue. So he certainly had an interest in it. So he drove out to the transmitter, and we communicated over the phone. He asked, "Does this work?" And I said, "No, still not getting a reading. Does this work?" And so on. And once in a while, I would hear a loud crash in the background or something, and he would quietly utter something that you cannot normally say on the air. But eventually we got
It wasn't
signals.
FCC compliant.
He was FCC compliant, exactly. Finally, I think maybe after a half hour delay, we were able to get both the AM and FM transmitters up running again. And I thanked Vern profusely, and he, I guess, said no problem, although I'm sure he was not amused that he had to get called out. What happened was apparently the power surge was so sudden that it affected some components in both the transmitters. But in any case, we got back up and running, and I ran back-to-back spots at times: Pepsi-Cola, the Charles City Drive-In Theater, Pizza Hut, back-to-back, and I got caught up. It took maybe 45 minutes to an hour to get caught up on the spots, but when Vern came back into his office Monday morning, he was pleased to see that we did not lose a single spot. So that was my inauspicious introduction to radio, and I maybe should have taken the hint that I shouldn't stay in the business, but I did. Um, but that first day would otherwise have been pretty forgettable. But the uh, the air conditioners saw to it that it would turn out otherwise.
Well, David, there were two big lessons from there of the importance of knowing where the boss is and who to call, and that to make sure that the spots run. Those are the two lessons. They don't really care what the DJ says or what music was played. As long as those spots run, you learn that
Oh,
valuable lesson.
absolutely. I mean, Vern was of that generation where he just didn't care, of course, for the music these kids are listening to today. I think he was in his 40s at that point, and he just, uh, like you said, all that matters is the fact that it is a business. Broadcasting is a business, and you need to make sure that the revenue comes in, especially if you have a, a tight profit margin in a small market radio station.
Junior year of high school, you proceed, gets to be senior year, deciding what your future plans were, David. What did you think broadcasting was still something you wanted to pursue?
I it I it turned into that, yes. I was also editor of the high school newspaper, which at that time at our high school it was a weekly page printed in the local regular newspaper, the Charles City Daily Press, and I I liked that, but there was something about the immediacy of broadcasting that appealed to me, and so I decided uh, in the fall of 1974 to uh, enter Iowa State. Everyone knew about Jack Shelley. He was, of course, by that time, well before he even came to Iowa State, he was a legendary broadcast journalist in Iowa. And after he retired from WHO TV, Iowa State brought him on board as a member of the faculty in the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication. So journalism became my major, and Iowa State became my college in the fall of '74. Um, Problem was Jack Shelley was so popular, the line outside his office. I say this metaphorically, not literally, but you just imagine this long line of eager students waiting to have a few minutes with Professor Shelley. He was uh, just an amazing uh, lecturer and mentor to many students at Iowa State. My advisor actually turned out to be Carl Friedrich, who was the yearbook advisor. His specialty was periodical journalism, um, and he was also wonderful, but he naturally did not have an interest as strongly in broadcasting. Um, but taking what courses I could from Professor Shelley, Introduction to Mass Communication. He taught a course called Informative Writing for Radio and Television, which encompassed news writing as well. And I learned at some point, I believe Jack Shelley really was the among the pioneers, if not the pioneer, in developing uh, style book for broadcasters back in the 1930s. And so this incredible heritage or legacy really came to life during those classes I took from him.
Because at that time in the mid 1970s, that's only 30 years removed from when he's broadcasting the end of World War II. It's not that long ago when you think about it in today's years. So, David, were there experiences in college broadcasting or in other instances that stuck with you for your career?
There were, for fun, I volunteered at the student-run station on campus at Iowa State. The call letters at that time were KPGY, which we all affectionately nicknamed KPGY. And I think it was 19 watts. It was a two-bay transmitter mounted on a chimney, I think, atop Friley Hall, which was it was co-ed by the time I was there, but it was historically a men's dormitory on the west side of the campus. And I learned a lot about music during that time. It was a really great outlet. I had a show on Sunday mornings, which was deliberately low key, and I picked up on acoustic and folk music from that time. It was just a nice outlet to kind of get away from journalism for a bit. I stayed at Iowa State for 2 years, and I don't mean this in any way to criticize Iowa State, but I, at some point, toward my junior year, decided I did not want to complete my degree there. There were, I think, some personal reasons I think I had that I just didn't feel that it was really a good fit for me. But again, had nothing to do with Iowa State as an institution. I just didn't feel that I really belonged there. And so I applied to and got accepted at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And in January of 1977, I was a mid-year transfer, so I picked the coldest time of the year to move from Ames to Madison. I never planned these things very well, but so it goes. But I really felt conflicted at the time. Iowa State had some outstanding professors that I hated to leave behind. Lorraine Wexler was a professor who specialized in science journalism, and I learned a lot from her. Dale Boyd taught the infamous basic reporting lab that we all were required to take. I think it was 3 hours, 3 or 4 days a week, writing news on the spot. I learned so much from him. But at Madison, there was an interesting mix, I think, between the practical application of field reporting and theoretical bases for journalism. What type of journalism is to be practiced? And I took a course in law of mass communication from Harold Nelson, who literally wrote the book. There were other very good professors at Wisconsin as well. My advisor was Dan Drew, who is now professor emeritus at Indiana University. He was associate professor at Wisconsin at the time. And about, I'm going to say, well, today is April 1st. It was 48 years ago today. I just realized that I started working at WHA, the NPR member station at the University of Wisconsin. And it was the flagship station for the Wisconsin, at the time called the Wisconsin Educational Radio Network. It's now Wisconsin Public Radio. And it was a tremendous experience, and it was a really interesting time to be there as an employed bystander. In 1977, WHA, probably like a number of other larger public radio stations, had undergone a significant change in its programming approach. The traditional notion of educational radio, where there are long blocks of lectures or symphonic concerts or instructional programming, that was giving way to more of a news and public affairs information approach in a magazine format, much in the way of locally emulating All Things Considered, which earlier in the 1970s really began to redefine broadcast journalism, at least in the context of radio. And the manager of WHA at that time was Jack Mitchell. Jack Mitchell was one of the founding producers of All Things Considered, and he and his young family moved from Washington back to the Midwest. I'm not sure where Jack is from originally, but I believe he was from the upper Midwest. And he, during this time, became general manager of the radio operation of WHA. And there was a lot of tension during that time between the so-called old guard and the new management approaches. And that's inevitable. Change never comes without challenge. But some, I think, had argued that Jack's approach might have been a bit too draconian in ways. He did make some very abrupt changes in programming, and he very abruptly fired one longtime producer from what I recall, just without any advance word at all. It was a difficult time, but it was, I think, inevitable that the station was going to undergo those programming changes. And I'm an undergraduate. I'm watching this in a sort of detached way, but wondering, what would my place be at this station? And I did remain there for the rest of my undergraduate years. I was hired by Cliff Roberts, who was for many years the senior staff announcer, classical music announcer at WHA. So in a sense, I was in a bit of a bridge of that time. So it was definitely a challenge. But it was a tremendous experience. I really felt that it was an opportunity that I should keep in mind as something to really treasure, and I have for a very long time since. There is
David, I want to talk a little bit about some of were there any other experiences at the university there or at Iowa State, or can we move on to the professional work?
Let's back up a bit to Iowa State, because there was an interesting experience I had as a freshman in the fall of 1974. I worked part-time as an off-camera booth announcer at WOI TV, which at that time was licensed to Iowa State University. And this was a very unusual arrangement. I think there may have been one or two other television stations similarly situated in the U.S. at that time. I believe the University of Missouri at Columbia was a licensee of a network affiliate there, but very few institutions actually had a commercial TV station on campus. And so you have this opportunity to get real life experience in a commercial broadcast setting. I was, as it turned out, the last person hired to work as an off-camera booth announcer at Channel 5. This position was kind of a carryover from the early days of TV, in which a live off-camera announcer might be called on at the last minute, literally, or even last second, to fill some unexpected airtime. And we were responsible for trying to keep the airwave filled if any mishap should occur. This was long before computerized technology, certainly long before satellite feeds. Like most stations, network affiliates at that time, I think WOI received its ABC network feed via microwave link, or maybe a landline, I'm not sure. And the likelihood of mistakes on the air was just exponentially higher than compared with now. Film could break, a live newscast might end unexpectedly early. There might be a failure in the videotape section. The projection booth was always bright with very, very, it was a house of cards sometimes. And if everything worked, everything was fine. But if something happened, then we, as an off-camera announcer, would get called on to read a filler script over a station identification slide. And that happened with me a couple of times in that job. I remember when I was being introduced around to the crew when I was starting, one of the directors, I'll never forget him, Rick Dahlgren, was technical director at Channel 5 at the time, and he did a lot of the switching for local live programming on Channel 5. Well, Rick looked at me, I guess, when I was introduced to him, and he said, "Oh, another rookie." And I thought, well, this will be fun. This will be interesting. But we hit it off fine. But there was one time, I think, when the local live newscast, and I seem to remember it was midday, ended about 2 minutes earlier than expected. And Rick was flying about. I could see him directly from where I was sitting, and he was running fader bars up, and he put a station identification slide up, and I remember calling into him on the intercom just quickly and said, I'll take care of this or whatever. And we had a script handy promoting upcoming movies on Channel 5. And on Tuesday night at 10:30, be sure to see Barbara Stanwyck in, etc. And I deliberately slowed down a bit, and I tried padding it out as much as I could. We had movie promos that extended well into the end of the following week. And by the time I got done with that, I think I had about 15 or 20 seconds left to give a very, very long station identification. ABC for Central Iowa, you're watching Channel 5, WOI TV in Ames. Central Time now is 12:30, and, no, way up to it. And it was my proudest moment there, because after everything got squared away and we started the next block at 12:30 straight up, Rick called into me on the intercom and said, "That was a hell of a save." And I didn't plan it that way. It just happened. It was one of the few success stories I can recount from that time. But it was a vestige of earlier TV, especially in the 1950s. But Channel 5, like other stations, was phasing it out. And by the spring of 1975, our positions were eliminated. They kept one full-time announcer who pre-recorded everything. Bob Bell was our the person we reported to, and they kept Bob on staff. And I'm not sure about this, but I might have been the last person in Iowa to have that type of job, because I'm not aware of, I was not aware of other stations at that point in Iowa that still employed off-camera announcers that way. So I don't know. That's
it is an era, absolutely an era gone by. No doubt on that. You spend time in Ames, in Madison. Then you start working outside of the college atmosphere, Janesville, Alaska. You kind of had a couple of other stops there, David, that were, I would imagine, anything but boring.
Well, in my last semester at Madison in the fall of 1979, I began interviewing for positions. I knew I could not stay at WHA forever, and because it was a student position. And so I was looking for radio reporting work in small markets, both in the Midwest, and I was interested in the Pacific Northwest. And I had scheduled a couple of interviews in Oregon and Northern California. This was, I guess now it can be told, I took a couple of days off from class, and I saved up for a flight to Portland from O'Hare for the 2 or 3 interviews. It was not a huge itinerary. But one was in Medford, Oregon. And I tell this story as potential interviewee who was also just coming out as a gay man in the fall of 1979, just before graduating. I finally was coming to terms with some truth about myself that I wasn't willing to acknowledge up to that point. And so I was in kind of this weird state of not knowing if this was going to affect my career or not. And I had been out, you might ask an LGBT person, when did you come out? It's a process, but I would say for me, it began with a support group meeting in Madison that fall. And so it was just 3 or 4 weeks before this trip that I began talking with other people about this. And so it was still very raw, I guess, or fresh on my mind. And in Medford, Oregon, I interviewed at KYJC Radio, which was at the time very news-oriented, very community service-oriented radio station, just the kind of station I was looking for. And the interviewer was the acting manager of the station, R. Charles Snyder. And the interview was going pretty well. He was pleased with how things were going. But then he made a comment that was completely unprovoked to me, and it just blindsided me for a moment. He turned to, he was sitting at his desk, and he turned to the mail that day, and he picked up a public service announcement script that he received in the mail from, and pardon my language, but I'm saying this to quote him directly. He said he got this PSA request from some, quote unquote, some fag group in Eugene. And then he very theatrically, dramatically tossed it into the wastebasket. And I actually called him on it. I said, I don't think that's an appropriate thing to say. He then doubled down and then asked me, well, he made a very, again, a very inappropriate and rather graphic remark about, I don't even want to go into that, but he then asked me, well, do you think this will affect our working relationship? And I said, I'm sorry, but I think it will. And I got up and left. I actually walked out of what was my first interview. As I left the station and went back to my motel room, I wondered what I had gotten myself into and whether this was going to be a barrier in this field. And I decided I'm not going to bring it up. It's, I guess, at that time, what we would call don't ask, don't tell. And my approach was going to be to not necessarily volunteer it, but to not deny it if for some reason somebody asked. And so I was on this skating on the ice rink with that for several years to follow. Needless to say, I did not get the job in Medford and returned to the Midwest, and it worked out. But in 1981, I began work in Janesville, Wisconsin at WCLO. It was a radio station that was owned for a long time by the Bliss family, which also owned the Janesville Gazette newspaper. And it was one of those broadcast properties that the FCC had either grandfathered or targeted for duopoly practice. There was, at that time, limitation on the number of broadcast properties that a company could own, but also a limitation on whether broadcast stations could be co-owned by the same company that would own a local newspaper. And Janesville, I think, was granted an exemption, and so we were co-located with the Gazette newspaper. We never interacted with the reporting staff, and we were, in fact, competitors in that sense. But at Janesville, I did the morning news, and toward midday conducted mainly interviews with local city officials, city government, although I did not cover meetings because of my schedule. The station signed on, at that time it was, I think, a 19-hour a day or 20-hour a day operation. So we signed on at 5 o'clock a.m. So I conditioned myself to wake up by 3:15 each morning. It was definitely not for the weak-hearted, but
The old
it's a good
early
thirst.
morning grind, David. Yes, that does get to be a change to the body, no doubt about that. When you moved to Alaska, broadcasting any different up there?
It was an exciting time, and yes, it was in some ways. For one thing, there was it was actually a growth industry during the 1980s. Um, when I was offered the position at the Alaska Radio Network, which at that time was, I think, a 9 or 10 station network around the state that was based in Anchorage. There was in the broadcast industry, I think, in Anchorage at that time, a brief but glorious moment when reporters were actually in demand. There was a time when all 3 network affiliates in Anchorage were expanding their news departments. The Alaska Radio Network that I worked at was based at an Anchorage radio station, which had its operations literally down the hall in the same building. But there were other competing stations in town that were expanding their news departments. Our strongest competitor was KPGY, which was a 50,000 watt clear channel station in Anchorage, and they were starting up a rival network of their own. So in terms of the industry, at least for 2 or 3 years, it was expanding in parallel with the post-pipeline boom that was characterizing Anchorage's economy. You might be aware that in 1969, construction began on the Prudhoe Bay to Valdez pipeline, which was underway. The completion of it, I think, occurred around 1978. And after a bit of a lull following construction of the Alyeska pipeline, as it was called, there was a secondary boom of supporting services and industries in Anchorage, including broadcasting. So it was an exciting time to be part of that the cycle. And also from a news standpoint, it was a very interesting time in terms of issues that were surfacing in Alaska and also locally in Anchorage.
Yeah, I would
Anchorage,
imagine no shortage of stories to cover, it sounds like.
not at all. The no shortage at all. The dynamic of Anchorage was very interesting at that time because it was growing so rapidly, and there were ongoing land use and planning and zoning issues. You might not normally think of a planning and zoning meeting as interesting or contentious. They absolutely were in Anchorage, and I think they can be just about any place, because anytime you are proposing a change to someone's landscape, there is bound to be pushback. And in Anchorage, it was no exception. The city, I mean, I was astonished to learn this after I moved up there. Anchorage had no zoning until 1975, just a few years before I arrived. And the Planning and Zoning Commission in Anchorage was taking care to grandfather as much properties as they could, but also recognizing that any new developments would need to conform with the new municipalities' central plan, or whatever the document was called. In 1975, Anchorage organized as a municipality. In Alaska, you don't have counties as such, but you have boroughs or municipalities. And in Anchorage, in 1975, a very large area was essentially amalgamated into this new political unit. And so it opened up a whole truckload of new issues. And statewide during that time, there were issues of concern to indigenous peoples, the various First Person nations in Alaska, primarily Inupiat, we used to know as Eskimos, but the Inupiat in the interior and the north, the Tlingit in southeast Alaska. There were shared concerns about land ownership, land stewardship, and it was, to me as an outsider, it was complicated to understand those issues, but I was fortunate to meet sources along the way who gave me their own perspectives on what those issues were.
Well, David, let's talk about your transition out of broadcasting into the archivist work. We could do, this is not the archivist of Iowa Broadcasting, but we need to kind of move along a little bit here in our last few minutes. Your work as an archivist at the University of Iowa, then you got into the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. How did those two worlds collide to you, and why? And it's clear in listening to you speak, David, you do have a strong passion and understanding of the historic things that have happened along the way in all of these industries. But tell me about the marriage of the two next.
That's an interesting question, and it is an intersection or a marriage. I first learned of Grant Price's project back in around 1992. By that time, I was between broadcasting and what eventually would become archival work. That summer, I was working on a video documentary project for a nonprofit group in Charles City for restoration of a historic farmhouse where Carrie Chapman Catt was raised. She eventually founded the League of Women Voters. She campaigned for equal suffrage for women. And there was a campaign underway in Charles City to restore this home, and today it is open to the public as a museum. Well, that summer in 1992, I worked with a video crew from Iowa State to produce a 12 or 15-minute fundraising video. And Denny Goodrich, who I worked with that summer, he was the chief photographer, along with Bob Lindemeyer. Bob was based in Ames. I didn't work with Bob on the field, but he put me in touch with Denny and his crew. Denny just mentioned in passing, this professor at Wartburg College who's collecting artifacts and records of broadcast stations. And this was, I think, still 1 or 2 years before Grant Price began to undertake an oral history project. So this was very early on in the formation of the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. But I followed up on Denny's tip and reached out to Grant. I can't remember if I had sent him an email first. I think I did, and introduced myself. And he replied, as you know, Paul, Grant's emails were written in all caps. And at first, I wasn't sure if he was shouting at me or what, but I came to realize that was Grant's broadcast script writing style. So there it is.
We call it Grant font. That's what we used to call it. It was Grant font.
Absolutely. Well, by 1994, and I think Grant had an influence on me, at least in part, for this. It was also the project in Charles City that turned me on to public history more vividly. But learning what Grant was up to, I decided in 1994 to enter graduate school at the University of Maryland, and I studied archives administration there. Maryland has, and still does today, a dual master's program specifically geared toward archives administration. You can take the MA in history and pair it with the MLS in library and information science. It's a wonderful program, and I really benefited from that. But during that time, Grant and I kept in touch, and I by happy coincidence, learned of a collection at the University of Maryland uh, known as the Library of American Broadcasting. And it was also co-located with the National Public Broadcasting Archives. So I worked there for most of my graduate school years, from 1994 until 1998 when I graduated. During all this time, Grant and I kept in touch. We even co-authored an article together for the Annals of Iowa, which is the refereed journal of the State Historical Society of Iowa. Grant was intimately familiar with the FCC licensing dispute for Channel 7 in Waterloo in the early 1950s. And so that was really my first project in working with Grant, and it was such a pleasure learning insights from him about Waterloo politics of the time, the nature of broadcasting, and the eagerness of radio station owners to get into television. Yeah, I just learned so much from him when we prepared that article, and so it was published in the I believe the summer 2000 issue of Annals of Iowa, if anyone is interested. It's quite a story. And Grant, as you know, Grant was a great raconteur. He really, he loved to tell a good story.
Well, absolutely. And then you come together eventually to the board at Wartburg College when the archives had started. Grant's oral histories had taken off. Others have kind of picked up some of those things. You took leadership role there. You and Dean Borg co-chaired the board for a long time. And again, another person who had a history. I remember the stories of you and Dean talking about Charles City, covering the tornado. Dean had been made it into town there. And as you look at the very generous gift that you were in a position to make for the archives to allow us to continue, why was that important in your mind to make sure that we're able to keep telling stories, keep documenting, keep a, a list of what it is that shapes Iowa?
Well, you're exactly right, Paul. The mission of AIB is to keep documenting, keep preserving, keep making available where possible the record of Iowa broadcasting, whatever that might be. Um, my husband and I thought that it was important to honor Grant's legacy. I think a frustration that Grant felt at the time of his death, unfortunately, was that his estate um, was not able to cover all of the uh, components, I guess, of Wartburg College that he wanted to support. Um, there was a very difficult time with the stock market around 2008, and it it did damage his estate to the point where he was unable to. His estate was unable to provide the needed endowment to support the archives of Iowa Broadcasting. There were other priorities and projects Grant wanted to support as well, and those did get, thankfully, the support at Wartburg College as well. But for several years after Grant's death, we struggled with maintaining the archives. The college was very helpful in providing the physical space, but understandably, the salary line just could not be created given the very uh, finally drawn very tight budget constraints that the college has been facing. And so finally in 2020, when James and I were able to, through my family's estate, the disbursement of my family's trust, we were very blessed to receive some Floyd County farmland, one parcel of which we decided to donate to Wartburg College with the intent of, for Wartburg to do as it wished, but we did want the proceeds to be applied toward an endowment named for grant prize at the archives. And our intent was to help fulfill Grant's vision of ensuring that there would be a foundation or some basis of predictability of funding for that. And so the intent was to create a position, full-time archivist position, who is very busy these days. She has a very full plate, and she's doing an excellent job, not only with the broadcasting archives, but also 50% of her time with the college archives at Wartburg. And we're very, very grateful that Kay is with us to help fulfill Grant's vision.
Well, David, we couldn't do what we're going to do here in the future without your generosity, and we absolutely thank you for that. And we also thank you for your time today. We have hit the end of our time together here, David. So thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Paul and Cliff. I very much appreciate your time today.
David McCartney on this oral history on the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. All of our history interviews available on our YouTube channel through Wartburg and the internet. For producer Cliff Brockman, I'm Paul Yeager. Thanks for watching this oral history.